Today we spend the hour with Dave Isay, the founder of StoryCorps. Over the last 12 years, StoryCorps has gathered the largest single collection of human voices. In 2003, the first StoryCorps recording booth opened in New York's Grand Central Station. Since then, 250,000 people have recorded interviews with their loved ones through StoryCorps. Dave has just published a new book titled Callings, The Purpose and Passion of Work. Amy Goodman and I recently interviewed Dave Isay about the book, but we began by discussing the case of Moreese Bickham, a former death row prisoner who recently died at the age of 98. In 1958, Bickham, an African-American, was sentenced to death for shooting and killing 2 police officers in Manville, Louisiana, even though Bickham said the officers were Klansmen who had come to kill him and shot him on the front porch of his own home. Many other people in the community also said the officers worked with the Ku Klux Klan, which was a common practice in small southern towns. Moreese Bickham served 37 years at Angola State Penitentiary in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Dave Isay chronicled his story in the 1989 radio documentary, Tossing Away the Keys. Bickham won 7 stays of execution, but Louisiana's governors repeatedly denied him clemency until, under enormous pressure, he was finally released in 1996. Days after he was released, he traveled to New York, where he was interviewed on WBAI's Wake Up Call by Amy Goodman, Bernard White, and others. Wake Up Call had closely followed Bickham's case and helped give it national attention. We began our interview with Dave Isay by playing for him Moreese Bickham in his own words.
I was shot through the heart and my navel string shot off, and I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, I know you're good, God, and you made one promise. Honor thy father in the mud, your days be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. I said, I might not have been an obedient child, but I tried. And I said, for that reason, allow me to have a few more days. And he did. From that day, I had a good walk with God, but I never had a personal relationship with him until I was laying at the point of death with a bullet shot top of my heart all with. He showed me that I was going to get up in 48 days. I'm up and working. When I got shot in 52, I asked the Lord, I said, if it ever be anything else like this, give me something to shoot, that the other man died, not me. 6 years from that day, I was reminded of those words, and I got into it at that time, and I had served 37 years for it. I could have at least said to the Lord, don't let this happen anymore, and it wouldn't have happened. But I was a person that didn't see but one way, and that was my way. It wasn't God's way. And I've told many ministers and many people that something hit me in my head, told me to do what I did, and they said, oh no, the Lord ain't never told you. I said, well, I know there wasn't no spirit in the world tell me to do something when it's over with, said everything gonna be all right, and I lived through 7 stages of execution, all the heart attacks and the operation I had, and come out in good enough health to be flying all over the world. Nobody can tell me God wasn't on my side.
That was Moreese Bickham in the studios of WBAI. It was back in 1996. The studio was packed. I remember it so well. It was Martin Luther King Day. And he came in with his family, with his daughter. I think his grandson might have been there. The late, great Gil Noble was there. Of course, Bernard White and I, we hosted Wake Up Call. But Dave Isay, you had really shone the spotlight on Moreese's case when you did a documentary on Angola. Talk about the significance of Moreese Bickham, who just died at the age of 98.
Well, I remember that day well. I just watched the video last night that TV viewers saw, and it was an incredible moment with all of us sitting there, because WBAI had been fighting for his release for, I think, a year, every day, pounding for his release.
Well, we would say, is Moreese Bickham free yet? I mean, Bernard White, Errol Maitland. Wait, has Moreese Bickham gotten out of jail yet?
Yeah.
I think even the Louisiana Attorney General or the governor talked about the significance of this radio station.
And you know, I think every day you would play the Nina Simone song, I Wish I Knew How It Feels to Be Free. And sitting in that room with Moreese with his headphones on as he rocked back and forth 48 hours after getting out, you know, listening to that song with his kids and his grandkid crying was just one of the most remarkable moments, I think, of my life. So he was, I mean, it was an absolutely insane case. I mean, these two sheriff's deputies had come to his house.
This is in the 1950s.
Yeah, in the 50s. And they had come to kill him. And they shot him right above the heart, and he rolled over on a gun, and he killed the two of them. And he actually talks in that interview, because I watched last night this thing from 20 years ago, and he talks about how one of the kid and grandkid of one of the officers he shot was visiting him back then in the 50s, saying, you should not be here. And now, you know, there's a granddaughter of one of the officers who was killed, who has been trying to apologize to Moreese and never got a chance because he was 98 when he died and he was too sick.
These deputies were so determined to kill Moreese Bickham coming to his house that they wore their sheriff's clothes over their pajamas. They came in the middle of the night.
That's right. And I heard that they claimed that they had to kill him because he was angry for not allowing allowing him to get into the car with them, or something, like just some absolute craziness.
Dave,
he was a fine human being.
You had discovered him when you did your documentary "Throwing Away the Keys" about Angola
30 years ago. Yeah, so he was one of these guys who had been in Angola serving the longest prison sentences in history, and he cared for the rose bushes at Angola, and was just
plantation prison.
That's right.
Named for the country in Africa where so many people had become enslaved in this country, had been taken, kidnapped from Africa, and the plantation was named for the country that the Africans had been taken from.
And there were a bunch of men who had been there for longer than anyone else in history. And some of these men had actually, this was not the case with Moreese, who had spent all of his time on death row, but there were many men who had been brought in and told to plead guilty to whatever crime they had been accused of, even though many of them hadn't committed them, because if they went to trial, they'd get the death penalty. And there was a law back then that the rule was you got out after 10 years on a murder. And then they changed the law when some of these guys were about to get out. So you had people serving 30, 40, 50 years for crimes that they hadn't committed because they were trying to save their lives. And Moreese had spent all this time on death row and was just, you know, he was a minister. He told the story of getting old in prison, how he became Pops, that was his name, from when he was a young man, how he'd had to pretend he was crazy on death row, going into psychiatric hospitals because it was the only way to avoid the death penalty. And he was an amazing man. And more amazing than that, he got out 20 years ago, and he lived till the age of 98. By himself independently in Oakland with his family.
In California.
Yeah, and was just a remarkable man.
That was StoryCorps founder Dave Isay. We'll be back with him in a minute.